The last P is personal. Those of us who struggle with hope tend to take failure personally. Now, again, we need to own what we should own when we fail. But more often than not, when we fail, there are other contributing factors. There are things that contribute to failure in almost every situation in life. But the person who's losing grip on hope tends to kind of want to have a pity party. It's all me, it's all my fault, it's my problem, I'm just a failure. Again, when we struggle with hope, it tends to feel permanent, it tends to feel pervasive, and it tends to feel personal. And these things are important for us to own and to wrestle with. In Proverbs 13, verse 12, we are told that delayed hope makes the heart sick. Hope delayed, that's the way it says. Hope delayed makes the heart sick. There's just something about those experiences in life where we are oh so hopeful for a certain outcome, and then that outcome does not happen, and our heart feels literally sick. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to do some work around the house. I had to paint some windows that we're going to be replacing in our house, and I was down in the basement, and I wanted to listen to some music, and so I put on the musical score for my favorite play, and I got to apologize to Dr. John Cox this morning. It's not Shakespeare, but it still is a play that I've grown to love. It's a play called Les Miserables. And some of you know the play. It's taken from a book by Victor Hugo. It's about the French Revolution, and it's just a glorious struggle with the human spirit and hope and despair and frustration. And there's a piece in that play where one of the main characters, her name is Fantine, and she's singing a song about the dream I dreamed for my life. And she's talking about this relationship that she had and how this enriched her life. And it was this beautiful, glorious summer that they had. But at the end of the summer, the man was gone and she was left with a child. And now as a woman, who couldn't make a way in the 18th century by herself, she had to sell her possessions, and then she sold her hair, and then she was selling her body, all to provide for this child. And she's singing this song about the dream I dreamed. And it's so different from this hell I'm living. And she concludes the piece by, and life has killed the dream I dreamed. Hope delayed. Hope that we can't hang on to anymore makes the heart sick. I think we've all experienced that heaviness, that coat that we carry around because we have an idea of how things are going to work out as we raise our children, or we have an idea of how things are going to work out if I pursue this relationship with another person. I remember a roommate that I had in college. He was involved in a relationship with a young woman, and he just assumed that relationship was going to lead to marriage, and one day she came alongside of him and said, I just don't see it going the same way. It took him 4 years. 4 years to date another person. His heart was literally sick about this relationship that he hoped for. And all of us have those hopes. And we all know what it feels like to be discouraged. Hope deferred, hope delayed, hope that's not fulfilled makes the heart sick. And when our heart is sick and when our spirit is heavy, it's awfully difficult for us to pursue in the way of spiritual growth and faith and love. And so I just want to ask us to consider in closing how the Apostle Paul thinks about these issues. Again, the Apostle Paul would ask us to frame the questions differently. Instead, for example, of saying that this situation is permanent, the first P, Paul would say that we should focus instead on the fact that Christ is eternal. In other words, what we are going through, the Apostle Paul would want to remind us of, is not going to last forever. The gospel is going to endure forever. Christ is going to endure forever. What we are going through at this moment is not going to endure. It is not permanent. The devil would want to whisper in your ear that what you are struggling with right now is permanent. But the Apostle Paul would say, don't you go there in faith. Again, when Paul is writing to the Corinthian church in the 4th chapter, he talks about all the things that he had to go through as a disciple of Jesus Christ. I mean, this guy was shipwrecked. He was flogged. He was ridiculed by the Jews of his time. I mean, his life was more painful and difficult than I think any of us could begin to imagine. But then he summarizes it all with these words. But what we're going through is but a slight, momentary affliction, preparing us for a greater weight of glory. In other words, Paul is saying, because Christ is eternal, and because the gospel will not fail, I need to keep the challenges of life in proper perspective, to know that whatever I'm going through, I'm doing exactly that. I'm going through it. It's not permanent. It will not last. The only thing that will last is Christ. And as followers of Jesus Christ, we need to cling to that truth in those experiences in life where we think my marriage is permanently broken. My body is permanently broken. My relationship with my boss or my children is permanently broken. The Spirit would say, don't lean into that kind of thinking, saints. There is only one thing in life that is permanent, and that is the gospel. That is the love of Jesus Christ and the plan and purpose He has for your life and mine. The second thing that Paul would want us to understand as we push against this tendency to let go of hope is the fact that not only are our problems temporary, but that the way in which hopelessness would want us to believe that it permeates who we are, Paul would say, don't go there, because the gospel is universal in its power and in what it is going to accomplish. I just love the way the Apostle Paul speaks in this text. In verse 6, he says, all over the world, the gospel is bearing fruit and growing. Now, you realize that when Paul wrote those words, he wasn't laying on a beach on some Greek island. Paul was in chains in Rome. He was, very likely wrestling with the fact that he was going to be killed. His situation was so pervasively, inflicting pain on his life that you would think that he would just wallow in that. But Paul chooses instead to say, my situation stinks, but the gospel is growing all over the world. Christ is accomplishing His will in the world, that the gospel is going to continue to do what God has called it to do. And so hold on to that perspective. Do not hold on to this sense that what you are going through is permanent, that it's pervasive, that it defines you. And finally, the Apostle Paul would want us to understand that because Christ is in us, we can persevere and have hope in all things. I want us to look at the text from Colossians chapter 1, verse 27. This really is the summary of the entire message that Paul shares with the Colossian believers. Let's read this together. To them, God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Do you live daily with the knowledge, with the sureness of the fact that Christ is in you? And so you have a certain hope, the hope of glory. That is the theme that kind of weaves its way throughout this entire message, that we have hope because we know that Christ is in us. Now, I realize that what I've just shared is not new information, but I think the challenge for us is, how do we come to know the Christ that is in us more fully? In other words, how do we grow in this kind of hopeful attitude that the Apostle Paul challenges us with this morning? That he can, say, even though I'm in chains, the gospel is doing what it's going to do, and I'm excited about that, and this sense of a better tomorrow, no matter the challenges. The way we come to know that kind of hope, the way we come to know the Christ that is living within us, is by being as intentional as we can about spending time in God's Word.